Hey everyone, welcome back to the last video of 2023. I'm excited today to talk to you about something I've been discussing with a lot of my customers throughout 2023, and that's the idea of switching from Docker to Podman. Podman is a fast, free, and easy to use container management solution that addresses a lot of the pains around Docker. Speaking of the pains around Docker, let's of course start by defining the problem. If you're not familiar with Docker, it is the most popular containerization platform for packaging, distributing, and deploying applications that use containers. And if you're not familiar with the container, think of a container as a way to abstract just the program from an operating system using the bare minimum amount of libraries that you need to run that program. In fact, Gmail is probably one of the most popular examples of a containerized program. Google spins up billions and billions of containers every week, day, something like that, of Gmail in a containerized format. But Docker, as a containerization platform, has just grown enormously over the last 10 years or so. It's no longer just the engine to run these containerized programs, but there's now a Docker Desktop, which is a graphical way of managing your containers on your local system. For developers, there's Docker Hub, which is a container registry for storing those containers. There's Docker Compose, which is for deploying those containers into Kubernetes. There's Docker Scout, and so on and so forth. So there is just an extensive ecosystem around Docker these days. But there is a problem with Docker. But before we jump into some of those problems, let's talk about some positive news. Stack Overflow did an annual survey of developers, and they found that Docker is now the top used other tool within the developer community. It was in second place last year, and now it's in first. So Docker is now an essential tool in the developer toolbox for managing programs in a containerized format. However, Docker Desktop is no longer free for enterprise customers. Docker is trying to figure out a way to make money. Developers have to make a living. Egress charges are enormous, and they've got to figure out a way to make money, so they are now charging for Docker Desktop. But beyond money, there are also some architectural considerations too that make Podman potentially a better solution. So Docker is also now rate limiting Docker Hub. They've also removed things like Docker Shim from Kubernetes. So there are a lot of changes happening with Docker. And so it's time to look at some other container management packaging solutions. So the solution, which I think is great, is a completely free and open source solution, and that is Podman. Podman is really great. Not only is it free and open source, but security was always a huge consideration for the developers of a Podman, and it can run without a daemon. It's compatible with the Docker CLI, command line interface. So you literally just swap the nouns. Instead of saying Docker run, you say Podman run. All that stuff is the same. And again, it comes with a security first approach to the architecture. And then also along the lines of security too, is the concept of rootless containers. So you can run those containers without needing root privileges on the underlying host that's running the containers. So this enhances the security posture by isolating the containers from any other running containers on the host. So when, or I should say, if and when the security vulnerability comes up, any compromise will be isolated. And then compatibility with Kubernetes is a key feature of Podman. As the name implies, Podman is a Kubernetes pod manager. And if you're familiar with the animal kingdom, seals, whales, otters travel as pods. So the Podman developers chose 3 cute little seals for the logo, and that's where that comes from. So let's compare Podman versus Docker. Again, security really is one of the biggest considerations here when you're comparing Podman to Docker. Everything else is compatible, except the key differences here is that Podman is daemonless. You can run, you don't need root access to run those containers. A lot of great auditing features within Podman um, knowing who's doing what. There is compatibility with security enhanced Linux labels and running things in, running the containers just in the user space. And Podman really has that second mover advantage that the Podman developers said, hey, Docker's doing some great things here, but we need to enhance the security. So what if we did the same stuff, but just took a different approach with putting security first and that sort of shift left concept? So there's that. Beyond that, yeah, there's some key differences between the management and orchestration. They're not huge. Docker does have Docker Swarm, which is more of a comprehensive solution for managing and orchestrating those containers at scale. You can do a lot of the same stuff with Podman, just maybe using some of your favorite um, automation software such as Ansible or Puppet or one of those. But okay, so with that, let's get into a demo and I'll see you over there.
Okay, so using your favorite package manager, which I would highly recommend so that you can stay up to date with all the latest, greatest features and enhancements, I'm going to use Brew to install Podman, Podman Desktop, and Podman Compose. There we go, all set. Okay, now it's time to run Podman machine init, which will initialize our environment, and we are going to use a Fedora CoreOS immutable operating system to provide a Linux machine because containers cannot run natively on either macOS or Windows. So we need a Linux runtime layer to actually run containers because containers require Linux. So now we will run podman machine start, and this will finish up the setup process. And it might take about a minute or two, depending on your system's configuration. But subsequent runs should be a lot faster. So we'll just be patient with that. We'll let that finish. And then we will start deploying a couple of container images. Okay, now that our environment is ready, let's start running some commands like we would using Docker. Let's run podman pull from our Quay registry, which is kind of like Docker Hub. It's a different alternative container registry out there. And I've got a Pacman container app that I want to try out here within Podman. So let's pull that down from the Quay registry. This is a public registry. You can try this out yourself. Okay, all set there, ready to go. And now I can actually try running it. So again, like I would do with Docker, instead of just saying Docker run, I will run Podman run, and my container is now running. So if I type in Podman PS, just like I would run Docker PS, you can see my container is actually running. And I can run Podman stop Pacman to stop the image, just like I would with Docker stop Pacman. But let's rerun it and let's go try it out. All right, expose import 80, and there's my Pacman container app running locally using Podman. All right, a ghost. Okay, we're good there. Cool. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to Podman Desktop. So Podman Desktop is a graphical front end to Podman, and it provides a nice polished graphical interface that you can run. It's got all kinds of great extensions here, so if you want to tie into your Kubernetes cluster, um, download some Docker extensions. It's fully compatible there. I like ddosify to kind of do some load testing. Trivy is great for scanning containers here. Let's scan this Pacman app, which is kind of old now. It's about a year. So I assume there's probably going to be a ton of vulnerabilities in there. But yeah, let's use this great extension within Docker Desktop to scan the container for any critical security vulnerabilities. That's going to take a little while there. So yeah, let's go ahead and let that run. But let's go back to the dashboard. Well, there's some images. Let's take a look at that first. There's the Trivia image, and then there's the Pac-Man image that I pulled. There's pods. You can actually run actual pods like you would in Kubernetes. There's my Pac-Man app, but we're going to restart that just through the graphical interface instead of the command line. Now I can click on Open a Browser. That will open up a web browser to the port that I've exposed, port 8080. And now I can actually deploy to an OpenShift cluster if I want to test this out. So I will just click on deploy. And but let's actually look at the Trivy before we actually deploy this app. And yes, it's littered with security vulnerabilities, but we'll ignore that and just deploy that to OpenShift anyways. This is just a test space. So here is Podman's looking at my API key here for OpenShift, and you can see there's an error, but that's just because the container already exists. I was fooling around with this earlier, and there's some artifacts. But if I go back to the OpenShift console, you can see that Podman Desktop has in fact deployed my Pacman app to my OpenShift development cluster. So now I just need to expose a route to that pod. So I'll just go over to routes and click on create route. I'll just call it Pacman. That works. We'll let OpenShift provide the rest of the host name. Of course, we want to point it at the Pacman service. It's a Node app, port 8080. Yes, of course, I want to secure that route at the edge and redirect any traffic to my app. I will just click on create. And there is my route. Let's click on that. And boom, now my great Pacman container app that I have running locally in Podman is now available publicly on the web for testing that I can send to someone to kind of check it out. Um, Hopefully that made my life easier. So yeah, in conclusion, I hope that you find Podman really useful. Here you can tie into all kinds of different container registries. I've got Docker Hub, Quay there. As I said, Docker extensions are fully compatible with Podman. I like Trivy, ddosify, and the OpenShift extension. Really easy to install those extensions. So yeah, thank you for watching. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2024.